Lisa Avery, thank you so much for being on the Get Foxy show. I'm so glad that we were able to connect today. I know we had some trouble last time trying to connect, but by gosh, we're giving it another shot, and we are going to get you on this show.
Wow, thank you so much for that, Terry. I'm really looking forward to this. I'm so excited. So, absolutely can't wait.
You bet. Well, you are the first guest that I've had on this show who is from across the ocean. And of course, the listeners have probably already heard your wonderful British accent. But you are currently in Barcelona, correct?
I am indeed. I'm in Barcelona, Spain. Absolutely. I made my way over here around 13 years ago after graduation with no idea what I wanted to do with my life. And arguably, up until a few years ago, that moment didn't arrive. So I've been here ever since. Yeah, absolutely. Enjoying the sunshine, sangria, and trying to do a little bit of meaningful work in the meantime. So that has been my story.
Fantastic. So, positive psychology. How in the world did you become a positive psychologist? How did that all transpire?
Sure. So it transpired in a not too linear way, really, because my original degree was in languages, and that's why I came over here to Spain and started language teaching. Now, I'd always harbored a secret interest in psychology, but I very much had at that time a fixed mindset, believing that, what you were good at and couldn't necessarily learn too much new. However, having had that desire to learn psychology and study psychology, there did actually come an opportunity when that became very salient in my life. And that was when I came across the School of Psychologists here in Catalonia. And I was actually teaching there. And at that time, they were organizing the first International Congress of Coaching Psychology. And I got very involved with that. And I was doing the interpretation, the translation, and much more. And it was one of those moments, Terry, when I thought, oh my God, should this not have been my life? This was just who I was, It was just, wow, it just felt so much like it should have been me. And so it was kind of like at that moment, there was a sinking feeling that, oh my goodness, this is too late. Yet there was a little bit of hope in me. There was this kind of feeling of, oh, I'm 29 years old. What if I start looking around? What if I start seeing what I could do to make this transition? And pretty soon after that, I came across a 3-year master's degree in positive psychology and coaching psychology. And that was a very decisive moment in my life when I thought, yes, this is exactly who I am. My innate talents, strengths, passions all just came together and it felt like me. And I didn't know how it was all going to evolve or transpire afterwards, but I just had this absolute belief and faith that I've found my thing and I am never, ever, ever going to let it go, ever.
What is the difference between just plain old psychology and positive psychology?
Yes, brilliant question, Terry. So traditionally, psychology really looked to correct that which was wrong with people. So it was looking at anxiety, depression, illnesses, psychological illnesses. And it really assumed that human beings needed some kind of correction, that we weren't naturally resourceful individuals as we are. Whereas positive psychology, it takes a much more positive approach in many respects, in the fact that it is a study of optimal human functioning. So whereas clinical psychology really takes people from -10 to 0, positive psychology takes people from 0 to 10. So usually with positive psychology, we're working with relatively healthy functioning individuals, but individuals who could be doing so much better in their lives. So I won't work directly with very clinically ill people, but I will work with ordinary people who really could make some significant improvements in their emotional, psychological, and physical well-being.
Wow. That sounds like the listeners that I have for this show.
Wow.
I have these
Absolutely.
wonderful women who listen to the show who, they don't necessarily have something majorly wrong in that psychological aspect, but there are
Yes.
small things in their lives that they're going, God,
Yes.
I just am not quite happy with that. Where do I
Yes.
go?
Yes. Absolutely, Terry. And that's very powerful, because sometimes you just have this little niggling feeling and it may manifest itself in a kind of frustration or anxiety or getting a little bit too angry a little bit too quickly. And usually when we start digging, there is this underlying sense of, is this all that life's about? Isn't there anything else? And usually at that point, to me, it's time to look very deeply at who that person is. So a question of identity, what are this person's innate strengths? What are they naturally good at? How can they use their strengths, to show up in the world, to make the world better in some way? What are their core values? So what's really important to this person, and how can they use those strengths to serve those values? It's really, beginning to dig deeply and try to find that authenticity within every human being, and from that very authenticity, you can then, create a much happier, emotionally stable existence. But all too often, Terry, we go through life and society and school and parents and family, they tell us how we should be, what we should be. And I even hear this in my clients, they come with language like should and have to. And I always insist that they replace these words, these verbs with would love, would like. I want to get to the crux of who a person is. I feel like, it's not a question of going out in the world and adding on to what we are. It's a question of coming back into the world and, like an onion, stripping away layer after layer of extrinsic, what is not that person. And when a person is really aligned with who they are authentically, happiness is the only possibility.
Oh, amen to that. I just did an interview not long ago with a gal by the name of Amy Lyle, and
Right.
she had written a book all about the failures that she had in her life.
Yes.
And so we had this
Yes.
great talk about authenticity. And even though, she had some amazing failures in this book, I mean, everything from divorce to pooping her pants in public.
Oh, oh,
She
yes.
owned those, and through comedy and telling these stories, she had this very authentic, heartfelt tone that just made you
Yes.
absolutely want to love her.
Yes. Yes. Wow.
So yes, I fully agree. When you are authentic and vulnerable, it makes you so much more human and relatable.
Absolutely. I think you hit the nail on the head there. And also, you tap into something really important because, positive psychology, whilst it's about optimal human functioning, it also really embraces the fact that negative emotions form a very real and necessary part of our lives. And I think, and you probably see this with your clients too, Terry, but I think all too often people are quite ashamed of experiencing negative emotions. And that feeling of shame really adds to that and makes it so much worse. There's this incredible exercise. It's very simple, but it's very powerful. And the idea is you take a sheet of A4 paper and you write on that piece of paper the thing that is most hurting you, the thing that is making you suffer, your biggest problem or traumatic experience. You take the piece of paper and you hold it at arm's length and you see what happens to your body, to your arms, how painful and annoying that stretch feels when you keep negative emotions at a distance. Now you then bring the piece of paper closer and closer to your body, feel your arms, your shoulders relax, and just by bringing those negative emotions in, holding them closer, acknowledging them, articulating them as clearly and articulately as possible, in that sense, the negative emotions, they're going to dissipate so much more quickly. So what I think is really important that people have to know, negative emotions are nothing to be afraid of. They're nothing to be ashamed of. And by articulating them as clearly as possible, as concisely as possible, they will lose that control over you. And I think that's, for me, my biggest takeaway from positive psychology. It's fine not to be okay. And the older I get, the more I embrace the fact that some days I feel rubbish and I don't have any problems in saying so. And that way it passes more quickly. So, and as you say, that expresses your vulnerability, which makes us so much more relatable. So, yeah.
I've gone through that same sort of experience myself. Earlier, before the show, I was telling you that my oldest son had been diagnosed with leukemia when he was 5.
Mm.
He's now 9, and he's gone through treatment, and he's okay. But I had to go through this process where I'd grown up in cowboy culture, and
Mm.
cowboys don't show any sort of um,
Sure.
weakness, because
No.
then that makes them look weak,
Mhm. Yes,
And
yes.
so I felt like I had to shove all that emotion, all this negative emotion, this anger, this sadness, this fear, this grief,
Mm.
and not show it or express
Yes.
it.
Yes.
And that caused a lot of problems. And I ended up having to break down in order to kind of
Oh,
have a breakthrough.
yes.
But
Yes.
what I've
Yes.
learned is that emotions are energy in
Mhm.
motion. And so
Absolutely.
if I'm constantly just hanging on to this stuff and trying to stuff it down and not let it
Yes.
go and move,
Yes.
boy,
Yes.
it creates all sorts of problems in my body, in my psyche, in my
Yes.
spirit. And
Yes.
so I've learned, hey, just let yourself feel it. And
Absolutely.
if I have to go, hide in the truck or a closet or wherever, I I will let myself feel it and
Absolutely.
experience it in my body
Absolutely.
and just let it roll. And I've found, oh
Absolutely.
gosh, I feel so much better
Yes.
just
Yes.
letting that energy move and my body and mind process.
Yes.
And
Yes.
then, it doesn't have the weight that it once had.
Absolutely, Terry. That is very powerful. That is such a powerful realization, and one that's taken me 37 years of existence and this master's degree to really understand. So I think, if any listeners can take away any one message, it would be that. It would be that, without a doubt. And if you don't feel capable of expressing your emotions to another human being, you can also do this in a journal. There's an incredible study which shows that if you take 4 consecutive days, 20 minutes each day, and you write in your journal about the worst experience you've ever had, 20 minutes free flow writing, you don't have to worry what you're saying, just get it out there. At the end of those 4 days, you have a real increase in emotional, psychological, and physical well-being. Initially, it will take a slight dive, but it will then, a couple of weeks later, really go back up. The idea is to express it in any way. And if you're not comfortable in doing so to another human being, then on a piece of paper, that is highly effective too. And I think, what you just said a few seconds ago was really important too, that in our worst moment, in our worst situation, often comes our biggest um, catalyst for change. So, for example, when I've studied people who have this sense of vocation, so a sense of the fact that their work is very meaningful and important to them and the rest of the world, in almost, I would say, 99.9% of those cases, each of those individuals went through a very difficult point in their lives. So the death of a loved one, divorce, the loss of a job. And it was at that very moment when they broke down that they found their greatest strength, and they found the cause that they were willing to fight for. And very often it was really to help other people so that they didn't have to go through the same. And so I think, so much good can come out of our suffering. And I think, we don't really view it that way, but we should, because that's where our incredible power and strength comes from.
What are some of the most common questions that you get from people about your work, Lisa?
The most common questions, probably the first question is, well, what is positive psychology? What can this do for me as an individual? Um, and in answer to those questions, really, I would say whenever you're getting to a moment in your life where there is a transition, where there is something going on that you don't feel you're in control of, when you're looking for something deeper, you see all too often people come to me when they're in a kind of existential crisis, Terry. So, they're just waking up at 3 o'clock in the morning and they've got this feeling that time's passing by, life's going by, and is that all? And this really points in one direction to me. You see, in positive psychology, we have two concepts of happiness. One is called hedonia. So it's about going out, having a good time, getting drunk, just having fun, basically, the pleasure of life. And this is the kind of happiness that our culture and society really feeds into, in our consumerist society, the temporary thrills of pleasure. Yet everybody knows how to get that for themselves. But the kind of time a person comes to me and the kind of questions they ask, these are at times when they're having this existential crisis and they're looking for something deeper and more meaningful, which to me points to a eudaimonic sense of happiness. So, a sense of meaning, a sense of purpose. Purpose is really important to human beings, and a sense of legacy, so that, the contribution they make within their life is going to live on, thereafter. We all want to feel that that's going to be the case in some way. So, the real questions I get, that they're around these kind of existential crises moment, what can I do to feel that my life is meaningful? What can I do to really become myself? All too often you see, Terry, people just need permission to be themselves, to have another human being say to them, you're fine just as you are. In fact, you're actually incredible just as you are.
Out of the many people that you've served, can you tell us a little bit about some of the transformations that you've seen in your clients?
Absolutely. Well, probably the most striking of all, and I mean, I do not by any means take all credit for this, because this person was an incredible human being, or is an incredible human being. I started to work with a guy who'd been diagnosed with multiple sclerosis. So in theory, this is a very degenerative disease and there's no turning back, according to medical science. And I started to work with him at a time when I think it had been around a year after diagnosis. And what he did was transform his life, like radically overhaul his life. So he had a banking job that he hated because it just wasn't aligned to his core values, his core strands. He was also homosexual, so he had a little bit of a problem with that for a while, really coming out, getting very authentic about his sexuality. So I met him at a time when he changed his diet, he'd quit his job, he'd started to pursue his vocation, which was acting, writing, really serving the world with his message. And at the moment I met him, he was really looking to transcend all the bad, transcend all the negative circumstances that he'd been going through, and really define who he was and what he was about and how he could move forward with this vocation. Now, incredibly, I think it was 3 years later, he's been given the all clear. So science, the doctors are baffled by this. I'm not quite so baffled. And the reason why, I've seen this happen quite a few times. When people become very aligned with who they are and what they're about, and they're no longer living a life that isn't theirs, their body, their mind, everything becomes in harmony. And the physical, emotional, and psychological transformation, because all of these things are so incredibly entwined, really can have quite remarkable consequences. So I would say, in answer to your question, it was a trajectory of this human being who is a remarkable human being, and how he really transcended negative circumstances and turned it into his biggest gift to the rest of the world.
It makes complete sense as far as where I come from as a traditional Chinese medicine practitioner.
Right.
And that holistic medicine where we say body, mind, spirit, it's all connected.
Yes.
Where the mind goes, your energy flows.
Yes.
And when that's all aligned,
Yes.
miraculous things can happen.
Absolutely, Terry. And it just reminded me of something, it's this circle, it's this cycle even between our thoughts, which lead to emotions, which in turn lead to a certain behavior. Thoughts, emotions, behavior, and it goes round in a circle. And at any moment, we are capable of intervening and changing that, between the thoughts we have and our emotions and our behavior, we can intervene at any moment and change the outcome. Because all too often people have this constant negative negative chatter in their own minds. And probably my second biggest revelation from positive psychology was the concept that not every thought we have is real. Most people think, well, just because I think it, then it's true, but it's not. The brain has this negativity bias. We will veer automatically as human beings towards a negative, because that's how we've survived as a species. Out there in the jungle, we had to be much more attentive to the tiger running to eat us rather than admiring the fruit on the trees. The brain will veer towards a negative, so we have to become very, very mindful of our inner self chatter.
That is fascinating, because I know, at least from my experience being a married man, my dear wife has this mean girl in her head that constantly is telling her, okay, well, you should have done that better. And, oh, you need to get the laundry done. And, oh, you better be taking care of this over here. And if you don't do that, well, then you're not a good wife. You're not a good mother. You're not good at your job. And all this negative yak. And what I'm learning is that most women in our culture have this, what I call a mean girl, in their head. And
absolutely.
so learning that what that mean girl says, and recognizing that it isn't necessarily the truth, is a big thing.
It's a really big thing, and I think, it can change your whole life, really, because the things you say to yourself on a daily basis, wow, day after day, week after week, month after month, that really creates your identity. You are constructing your own personal narrative in your mind. Say it out loud, because sometimes, in your head, it can sound fine. Say it out loud and think, could I say this to my best friend? Would I say this to a close family member? If not, why are you saying this to yourself? Like, how could you do that? Really trying to generate some self-compassion, I think, is essential. So much, in the last couple of decades, we really focused on self-esteem. And while self-esteem is really important, more important, I think, is that self-compassion. Because, we make mistakes all the time as human beings. We can't take ourselves too seriously. We've got to understand that we really do need to cultivate self-compassion. Give ourselves a really big hug in the morning. We've got to love ourselves. It's a cliche, but until we love ourselves, how on earth can we be receptive to the love of other people? And how can we give that? It's this whole idea from positive psychology that for every positive emotion that we experience, it's a theory called the Broaden and build theory. And it means that every positive emotion we experience opens us up to further positive emotions. So I feel positively, so I speak to a person in a positive way, and it just goes on and creates this chain of positivity and happiness. And actually, fascinatingly, the mind becomes more expansive when we're in a positive state. So there's a wonderful experiment in which participants are primed, first of all, with a comedy show. And then later they're given a photograph to look at. And then there's a group that are primed with a negative documentary, so it's very sad, it makes you feel very bad. And the people who see the positive, who experience the comedy, when looking at a photograph, their peripheral vision actually expands, so they're visibly noticing more. So the idea is, when we have positive emotions, it is opening us up to the rest of the world to see new people, experience new experiences, and really put ourselves out there and grow and create more psychological and emotional resources. So it's very powerful.
I'm going to switch things up just a little bit here, Lisa.
Yes.
What does Foxy and being Foxy mean to you?
Wow, this is a brilliant question. So, in my opinion, to be Foxy, let's say, first of all, it means being very authentic. It means stripping away, everything that you are not, stripping away all the negative things you've told yourself you are, all the labels from society. It means really getting naked with yourself and feeling really comfortable about who you are. And then going out, perhaps naked, to the rest of the world, showing yourself in all of your vulnerability, with all your courage, with all your passion, with all your heart. Being Foxy, it's getting to be who you really are and taking yourself yourself out into the world and really shining with your authenticity. And that to me makes a person more attractive than anything else in the rest of the world.
Mm. And when you're not feeling so foxy,
Yeah.
what are some tools and tips that you have for reclaiming that foxiness?
Absolutely. So, there is a really nice way to think about this, and it comes from the father of positive psychology, Martin Seligman. And he has an acronym, so 5 letters, which can help a person think about happiness in a very holistic way. Because I think, foxiness is really feeling fantastic on the inside and letting that shine through on the outside. So, in order to get to that point, we have to think about P, which are positive emotions. So, think about how you can cultivate positive emotions. Now, people just think of positive emotions as happiness, but that's not the case. For example, there's curiosity, there's serenity, there's awe, there's a full range of positive emotions. In order to experience them, put yourself in new situations, try new experiences, meet new people, really open yourself up, to the rest of the world to experience the full repertoire of positive emotions. So that's the P. The E is engagement. This means feeling really involved, feeling really connected to the kind of work you're doing. Okay, so perhaps finding work that is meaningful or trying to find a way to make your own work a little more meaningful. That's the P, that's the E. We then have the R, which is relationships. Now, relationships are fundamental for human happiness, So this is cultivating, really spending time with people who make you feel incredible, These days, I don't know about you, Terry, but these days I'm very picky about the kind of people I spend much time with.
Yeah,
Yeah.
definitely. I've been told that you can sum up your personality by the 5 people that you
Yes.
spend the most time with.
Absolutely, absolutely, absolutely. So that makes you question, I think, very carefully who those 5 people are.
Yes.
Absolutely. So we have the positive emotions, the engagement, the relationships. Then finally, we have meaning and accomplishment. Meaning, so finding something that is meaningful to you. So be that charity work, be that your own work, be that a hobby, but something which gives you a deeper sense of well-being, a deeper sense of connection and meaning to something. And finally, to me, this is the most important part, and that is the A for accomplishment. Instead of accomplishment, I like to think of this as progression, because what has been really proven in positive psychology is the fact that no single accomplishment will ever make you feel good for very long. We have this thing called hedonic adaptation. What it basically means is that no matter what happens in life, however good or bad, we will get used to that circumstance. So nothing will ever last for very long. So if we win the lottery, more often than not, 1 year later, the level of happiness of lottery winners is in exactly the same place as the day before they won the lottery. People have this kind of set point, So that means we're not striving for any one goal, because no goal will ever make us all that happy. But what we are striving for is a continual sense of progression. And it's that progression that makes human beings really happy, constantly growing into a bigger, better, brighter, and more authentic version of ourselves. And if you put these 5 things together, I think you're going to feel pretty foxy every single day.
Yes, indeed. How can people get a hold of you if they would like to learn more about you, what you do, or possibly even work with you?
Oh, thank you. Well, thank you for asking. Well, I would love to hear from anybody who has any questions or absolutely anything that I could help them with. And my website is www.workisvocation, all one word, workisvocation.com. And I would be delighted to hear from anybody about absolutely anything, because I'm very passionate about these subjects and I can speak for a long time about this. So I would be delighted. Thank you so much, Terry.
And you are more than okay with working with international clients. Most of my listeners right now are in the US, but I'm seeing that there are people out there around the world who are tuning into the Get Foxy show, which is really cool.
Wow, congratulations and thank you. Yes, I'm absolutely open to that. Many of my clients are internationally based, so we work via Skype and it works beautifully. So, absolutely.
Excellent. Well,
Thank
Lisa,
you.
thank you so much for taking the time today. And you are But, well, I'll just put it right out there. You are Foxy yourself.
Oh, thank you so much. That means a lot coming from you. Thank you. Thank you. You do incredible work yourself. I'm in awe. You know, what you do to make people feel incredible for me doesn't have a price. So I'm absolutely in awe of your work. It's massively important. Absolutely.
Excellent. Well, thank you again for taking the time. I honor you. I appreciate you. And we'll have to have you on again sometime in the future.
Wow, that would be such an honor. Thank you so much. Thank you, Terry.